picture this. You just spent, I don't know, $200 on this very intense, highly reviewed stack of morning supplements.
Oh, right. We've all been there.
Yeah. And you've completely overhauled your gym routine, too. Because, some fitness influencer swore that this specific combination of fasting and kettlebells would absolutely change your life.
Uh-huh. The classic optimization trap.
Exactly. So you do this for a month, right?
Yeah.
You are putting in the hours, you're sweating, you're swallowing these terrible tasting powders every single morning.
And let me guess, day 30 rolls around.
Day 30 rolls around, you look in the mirror, you check your energy levels, and you realize you have absolutely no idea if any of it is actually working.
Yeah, not at all.
Maybe you feel a little different, but you can't tell if you're actually healthier or just, completely exhausted from the new routine itself.
Wow.
You're putting in all this effort, but you're really just completely guessing.
I mean, it is the ultimate modern trap. We are totally obsessed with optimization and taking action, right? But we completely lack the personal mechanisms to measure if our actions actually map onto reality.
Which is exactly why we are pulling apart today's sources. I'm your host, and I'm here with our resident expert to jump into today's deep dive.
Hey everyone, glad to be here.
So today we're diving into this really fascinating set of professional materials. It's actually focused on how professional counselors and therapists handle evaluation and research.
Right, which sounds super academic, but
But it's not. I mean, the mission here isn't to get you, the listener, a degree in counseling. The goal of this deep dive is to decode these incredibly rigorous frameworks that professionals use.
so that you can actually apply them to your own life, yeah.
Exactly. We want to figure out how to evaluate your own projects, your habits, your blind spots, really, without just drowning in a sea of spreadsheets.
Because, look, if a clinical framework can determine whether a really complex psychological intervention is, say, saving a client's marriage, those exact same principles can absolutely tell you if your new morning routine is working.
Right. Is giving you more energy or just slowly depriving you of sleep?
Exactly. The actual mechanics of discovery, they're universal.
So before we can even begin to measure success, we have to isolate what we are actually trying to achieve. And this brings up a fundamental distinction right out of the gate in our sources.
Yeah, this is a big one.
It's the split between evaluation and research. And I feel like we use those words like they mean the exact same thing in daily life.
Oh, constantly. But they don't, not even close.
So break that down for us.
Well, understanding the difference totally changes how you approach your own problems. Evaluation it's entirely mission-oriented. It's decision-bound.
Okay, decision-bound, meaning what?
Meaning its only goal is immediate utility. You evaluate to gather information so you can make a hard decision about a specific program right now for a specific group of people.
So it's asking, did this exact thing work for this exact situation?
Exactly. It's boots on the ground, highly localized.
Got it. And research.
Research, on the flip side, is theory-oriented, right?
Yeah.
It's discipline-bound. It requires intense control over variables because its ultimate goal is to be generalizable to a massive, broad population.
Ah, so it's looking for universal truths.
Right. It isn't just asking if something worked here. It's asking the deeper question of why this phenomenon happens all in the human species.
Okay, let me test this just to make sure the boundary is totally clear. Let's say I want to fix my terrible grogginess in the morning.
Okay, classic problem.
Right. So I decide to drink a massive glass of water and do 10 minutes of dynamic stretching the second I wake up. If I just track whether I personally feel less like a zombie over the next 2 weeks, that is evaluation, right?
Yep, 100%.
But if I hook myself up to an EEG sleep monitor, control my bedroom humidity to the exact decimal point, and try to isolate the biological mechanism of waking up so I can publish a paper that's research.
That is a perfect breakdown. Evaluation is about deciding what you should do tomorrow morning. Research is about building the foundation of knowledge for a whole field.
Okay, I am going to challenge that line just a little bit, though.
Bring it on.
Isn't my personal morning routine tracking basically just, diet research? I mean, I'm still testing a hypothesis. I'm still looking at data.
Sure, I see where you're going.
It just feels like we are splitting hairs to give things fancy academic titles.
It definitely looks like splitting hairs until you look at the stakes involved. The difference lies in the actual application of the knowledge.
Meaning the timeline.
Meaning evaluation forces an immediate action. If your stretching routine isn't waking you up by Friday, your evaluation demands that you ditch it and pivot to something else immediately.
Right. I'm not going to keep doing it if I'm still tired.
Exactly. You do not care why it didn't work on a cellular level. You just care that you are still tired. Research, however, might spend 5 years uncovering why stretching fails to stimulate certain neuroreceptors.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that builds a beautiful, long-term theory, but it does absolutely nothing to help you get out of bed on Monday. Evaluation is for the practitioners surviving in the trenches.
And researchers for the architects designing the field. Okay, when you put it like that, the stakes are completely different.
Very different.
So if my daily life is mostly going to require evaluation, then we really need to look at how to actually do it properly. Because the material points out that when most people try to evaluate a problem, we kind of enthusiastically skip the most critical step.
Oh, we gloss right over it. It's wild.
Yeah.
Professional evaluation is a strict sequential process, and step one, the step that prevents almost every catastrophic failure, is the needs assessment.
Which I have to say sounds so corporate and dry.
I know, it sounds like a human resources seminar,
Mm-hmm.
but it is the bedrock. The textbook defines a need as the exact gap between what is and what is desired.
So measuring the gap.
Right. You cannot formulate a solution until you have painfully accurately identified that specific gap. Then you design a program, run it, revise it, and measure it. The sources even mention all these complex models for this.
Yeah, I saw those acronyms like PPBS, right? Planning, programming, budgeting systems.
Exactly. Or the CIPP model.
Yeah.
Context, input, process, product.
Yeah.
But beneath the jargon, it all starts with that needs assessment.
Okay, let's look at what happens when you decide you are too smart for a needs assessment. There is this brilliant, agonizing case study in the sources about a guy named Edward.
Oh, poor Edward.
It's so painful to read. So Edward lands a job as the new student life director at a small, intimate, liberal arts college. And he's, eager to make his mark.
Naturally.
But his previous job was at a massive, sprawling state university. So instead of doing a needs assessment to figure out what his new students actually lack, he just takes the incredibly popular life skills curriculum from his old state university and drops it right onto the small college campus.
He just assumes a win is a win, completely regardless of the environment.
And it is a spectacular disaster. The students just completely reject it. It doesn't resonate. Nobody shows up. And the whole initiative just falls flat.
It's a total flop.
Right. And he tries to save face by backtracking and having the students vote on a list of activities. But the list is just comprised of things he already decided they should want. The damage was totally done.
Yeah, Edward committed the cardinal sin of evaluation. He operated on assumptions. He assumed that a shiny, successful solution from context A would just effortlessly resolve an unknown problem in context B.
Without measuring the gap.
Exactly. He never sat down to measure the gap between what those specific liberal arts students had and what they actually desired.
It perfectly mirrors how we operate in our personal lives, though. It's exactly like buying one of those massive $1,000 organizational systems for your garage just because, like, a productivity influencer recommended it.
Oh, absolutely.
You spend an entire weekend installing this mammoth grid of pegs and bins, but you never did a needs assessment on your actual garage.
Right, you didn't look at your own junk.
No. So you end up with 60 tiny, beautiful drawers for screws you don't even own, and your giant lawnmower and rakes are still just sitting in a pile on the floor. You bought a hyper-specific solution to a problem you didn't have.
That is the perfect parallel, and you've highlighted exactly why this happens. Like, why do we all act like Edward?
I mean, why is the needs assessment so universally skipped when it seems like obvious common sense? Is it just because it's boring?
It's worse than boring. It's psychologically uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable how?
Well, human nature just craves the dopamine hit of a shiny, prepackaged solution. Identifying a real problem requires sitting in the discomfort of your own ignorance.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It requires looking at your messy garage or your messy life and admitting you don't actually know what's wrong yet. Buying the shelving unit gives you the illusion of forward momentum.
It feels like decisive action.
Exactly, even if it is entirely the wrong action.
And we want the cure before we even know the disease. But, okay, what if the problem requires more than just a quick evaluation? What happens when a practitioner actually does need to dig into the deeper why of a problem, but they aren't a scientist in a lab?
Right, transitioning to the research side.
Yeah, because this brings up a really fascinating tension in the material. People on the front lines, like professional counselors, they often completely despise doing research.
They do. They have what the material calls a long and ambivalent relationship with research.
Yeah.
It's a major point of friction in the entire field.
Which seems totally counterintuitive. If your entire job is understanding human behavior, shouldn't you be obsessed with the empirical research behind it?
You would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
But the reality on the ground is way different. First, there is a deep underlying fear of negative results.
What do you mean?
Imagine dedicating 20 years of your career to a specific therapeutic technique, only to run a rigorous study that proves it's no more effective than a placebo. That is terrifying.
Okay, that makes sense. That would be devastating.
Furthermore, formal research requires immense time and funding that practitioners simply do not have. But perhaps the biggest hurdle is just the sterile nature of empirical studies.
Too clinical.
Way too clinical. Heavily controlled lab research often feels cold and totally disconnected from the messy, chaotic, emotional reality of sitting in a room with a client who is actively falling apart.
It's like the difference between reading sheet music and playing a live rock concert.
Great analogy, yeah.
But the irony the sources point out is that the daily work of a counselor and the scientific method of a researcher are actually perfectly parallel tracks, right?
Oh, absolutely. Identifying why a client is struggling is the exact same cognitive process as formulating a research question. Designing a treatment plan is basically identical to designing a research methodology.
So the mechanics are the same, even if the environment is totally different.
Exactly. And to bridge this massive gap between the sterile lab and the messy real world, the field has leaned heavily into something called action research.
I really want to dig into action research because I feel like this is the exact tool you can use in your own life when you hit a wall.
It is. Action research is defined as experience-near research. It basically abandons the obsession with perfectly controlling every single variable in an artificial environment.
So it's much more practical.
Very practical. It focuses entirely on the routine problems you encounter in your actual day-to-day environment.
The case study for this in the text is a counselor named Oscar. And Oscar is working at this really busy agency, and he starts noticing a pattern.
Right, the waiting room issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His clients seem visibly uncomfortable, agitated, and embarrassed while sitting in the waiting room before their sessions. Now, a traditional researcher might try to secure like a $50,000 grant to study the psychological impacts of spatial design on anxiety disorders over a 5-year period.
Which Oscar obviously does not have the time or resources for.
Mm.
Nor does it help the anxious person sitting in his waiting room tomorrow.
Right. So Oscar employs action research. He proposes a hyper-localized, simple trial run. He tells his colleagues, hey, let's just rearrange the furniture.
Keep it simple.
Yeah. Let's change the layout of this specific waiting room, track the baseline behavior of the clients for a few weeks, and see if they appear more comfortable. He takes a daily annoyance and turns it into an immediate, localized research project.
And Oscar accepted that his data wouldn't be perfect, you know?
Mm.
He couldn't control what the clients did before they arrived, or the weather, or the terrible traffic.
He just wanted something actionable.
Exactly. He didn't let the lack of perfection stop him from gathering highly useful data. And this is where we really have to talk about Gelso's analogy from the text, because it is one of the most clarifying ways to view problem solving I've ever seen.
The windshield bubble, it's brilliant.
It really is. So Gelso, who is a prominent researcher, points out that every single research method ever created has fatal flaws. There is no perfect way to measure reality. He compares selecting a research method to applying a large decal or sticker to a car windshield. As you apply it, a bubble forms under the plastic. So you press your thumb against the bubble to smooth it out.
Right, to fix it.
But you don't actually eliminate the air, right? You just push that bubble to a completely different part of the sticker.
So you basically solve one problem by creating another.
Precisely. If you design a highly controlled laboratory experiment, you smooth out the bubble of outside interference, but you instantly create a new bubble. Your experiment is now so artificial that it doesn't resemble the real world at all.
And if you do what Oscar did,
If you run your experiment in the messy real world, you smooth out the bubble of artificiality, but you create a new bubble of uncontrollable variables. The bubbles are always there.
that's fascinating.
The goal isn't to find a flawless method. The goal is to pick the method where the bubble does the least amount of damage to what you're actually trying to learn.
Yeah.
Doing flawed research is infinitely better than doing no research at all.
I think that's incredibly liberating. It means you don't need a white coat to figure out why your life hacks are failing. And to show just how flexible this discovery process can be, the material breaks research down into 4 distinct dichotomies.
Yeah, these 4 pairs represent the different emphasis you can put on your inquiry. The first is laboratory versus field research.
Which is the windshield bubble in action. Are you controlling everything in an artificial room, or are you out in the wild, natural setting like Oscar's waiting room?
Exactly. The second pair is basic versus applied research. Basic research is purely theory-driven. You are solving a puzzle just to expand human knowledge. Applied research is taking that knowledge and using it to fix an existing bleeding problem.
Okay, got it. And the third?
The third is process versus outcome research. Process looks at the internal mechanics during the event. Outcome looks at the final result after the event.
Let's actually ground these in a real-world example instead of just defining them, because I want to see how they interact.
Sure, lay one on me.
Let's say I'm trying to figure out why I am constantly blowing my household budget. How do these apply?
Oh, perfect.
Hmm?
Okay, laboratory versus field. Are you analyzing your budget in a quiet room on a spreadsheet where everything is totally theoretical?
Hmm.
Or are you trying to understand your spending while you are actually standing in the grocery store aisle surrounded by marketing triggers?
Oh, okay. Wow.
Basic versus applied. Are you studying the macroeconomic impacts of inflation? Or are you just trying to figure out how to pay off your specific Visa card?
That one's definitely applied.
Right. Process versus outcome. Outcome research is just looking at your bank balance at the end of the month and realizing you are broke. Process research is analyzing the actual tense conversation you and your partner have every Tuesday night that leads to impulse buying.
Okay, that makes it so much clearer. But that leads to the final dichotomy, which is quantitative versus qualitative research.
Yes, the big one.
Right. So quantitative is objective, deductive, and relies on hard numbers. Qualitative is subjective, inductive, and relies on human narratives and experiences.
That's the definition, yeah.
And here is where I have to push back a little.
Go for it.
In that budget example, if I want to fix my finances, I want quantitative data. I want dollars in, dollars out. Hard math. How is sitting around doing qualitative research like gathering subjective narratives and feelings considered rigorous? It sounds like just storytelling to excuse bad habits.
It's a very common bias to assume that numbers are the only vehicle for truth, right?
Yeah.
Well, we all do it. But qualitative research exists to capture the vital mechanisms that numbers are completely blind to.
Blind to? How so?
Look at your budget. The quantitative data is crystal clear. You're going $300 over budget every month, and the math shows it almost entirely happens on Friday nights.
Okay.
The numbers are pristine,
Okay.
but they are completely useless for solving the problem because they cannot tell you why it is happening.
Ah, they just highlight the symptom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you bring in qualitative research, you sit down, you conduct an interview with yourself and your partner, and you explore the narrative of your week.
And what does that tell me?
The qualitative narrative reveals that by 6:00 p.m. on Friday, both of you are experiencing such severe cognitive fatigue from your jobs that the executive function required to chop vegetables and cook a meal literally physically hurts. So you order a massive takeout meal.
Oh, wow. The numbers tell you what broke, but the narrative tells you why it broke.
Exactly. You need both to actually intervene. If you only had the numbers, your solution would just be try harder not to spend money, which, let's be real, never works.
Never.
But armed with a qualitative narrative, your intervention becomes, hey, we need to meal prep on Wednesday, so Friday dinner requires zero cognitive load. They are completely complementary forces.
So we know we need to measure the gap. We know we don't have to be perfect. And we know we need both numbers and narrative. But how do we actually structure this tracking in our own lives?
This is the big question.
Because professional researchers usually survey thousands of people. If we are evaluating our own routines, our own budgets, our own diets, our sample size is exactly one. We only have ourselves.
Which is a valid constraint, but it's not a barrier. Broad surveys actually have massive flaws anyway. They suffer from terrible return rates and severe bias.
Oh, that makes sense.
So to solve for an audience of one, the material details, single subject research designs, or SCRD. This is the exact methodology professionals use to rigorously test interventions on individuals.
There's a great case study in the text here about Shannon. Shannon is a counselor who wants to track her own behaviors and effectiveness. She wants to be her own single subject.
And she can. The most fundamental way Shannon or you or anyone can do this is through an A-B design.
An A-B design.
It's a simple time series. Phase A is your baseline. You meticulously measure how things naturally occur without changing a single thing. Phase B is the intervention. You introduce the new habit, and you keep measuring to see if the data deviates from that baseline.
Okay, let's go back to the sleep example. Phase A, I track my sleep for 2 weeks and realize I'm averaging 5 terrible hours a night. That's my baseline. Phase B, I completely cut out my 3:00 p.m. coffee. That's the intervention. I track my sleep for another 2 weeks, and suddenly I'm getting 8 hours. The A-B design shows a huge change.
Which it does.
But I'm guessing A-B isn't rigorous enough to prove the coffee was the actual villain here.
It isn't, because the windshield bubble is still there. Maybe the weather cooled down. Maybe work was less stressful that week. Maybe you started reading before bed. You have correlation, but not definitive causation.
So how do you prove causation?
To truly prove causation on a single subject, you have to use an ABAB design, which is formally known as a reversal design.
And this is where it gets totally wild to me.
Oh yeah, it's intense.
To execute an ABAB design, I have my terrible baseline A. I quit coffee and sleep great B. To prove it was the coffee, I have to intentionally sabotage myself.
Yep.
I have to reintroduce the afternoon coffee, reverting back to phase A, specifically to see if my sleep gets ruined again. And if I start sleeping terribly again, I remove the coffee one last time back to phase B to see if the good sleep returns.
By turning the intervention on and off like a light switch, you isolate the variable. You've effectively become your own science experiment, and you have eliminated outside variables.
But wait, think about this in the context of a professional counselor helping a real human being.
Uh-oh. I know where you're going.
Let's say a therapist introduces a new cognitive technique, phase B, and it is radically curing a client's severe panic attacks.
Right.
According to the ABAB design, to prove the technique works, the therapist has to intentionally withdraw the successful treatment and plunge the client back into severe panic phase A just to collect clean data.
Yeah.
That is incredibly unethical. You are actively harming someone for a spreadsheet.
You have just hit on one of the most intense controversies in single-subject research. The textbook explicitly wrestles with this ethical dilemma. When an intervention is actively saving someone, withdrawing it for the sake of empirical proof is often deeply detrimental and totally ethically unjustifiable.
I mean, I would hope so.
This is the ultimate collision between scientific rigor and human empathy. In the real world, practitioners often have to just settle for a simple A-B design. They accept a less certain data set because protecting the human being is always more important than proving the mechanism.
It's the windshield bubble again. You accept the bubble of less certainty to avoid the bubble of doing harm.
Exactly. Now, whether you are running an A-B design or a full ABAB reversal on your own habits, you are going to generate data. And the text points out that you cannot interpret your own life if you don't understand how to look at the numbers.
Right. And we don't need a deep dive into middle school math here, but we do need to understand our own blind spots when we look at our tracking apps.
For sure.
Like, we all know how to calculate an average, right? A mean. But the trap we fall into is thinking the average tells the whole story.
It rarely does. If you are tracking your daily productivity on a scale of 1 to 10, and you score an 8, an 8, an 8, and a 9, but on Friday you have a catastrophic breakdown and score a 2.
Oh.
Right? That single outlier of a 2 is going to drag your overall average down significantly. If you only look at the mean, you will think your system is completely failing.
Which is why you have to look at the mode, right? The most frequent score.
Exactly. The average might be terrible, but the mode is an 8. You are actually succeeding most of the time.
Yeah.
But the real secret weapon for evaluating your own life isn't the average, it's the standard deviation.
Okay, remind me. Standard deviation measures dispersion, right?
Yes. It tells you how wildly your scores swing away from the middle.
Right. So if you are evaluating that new kettlebell routine or that new diet, you shouldn't just be looking for a high average day. You are looking for a low standard deviation.
Correct.
If your standard deviation is massive, it means your life hack is creating wild, unpredictable swings. One day you are a superhero, the next you are bedridden.
Exactly. A low standard deviation means the intervention is making you consistent. And consistency is usually what we are actually trying to achieve in the first place. That is a phenomenal way to apply the metrics. You are using the math to reveal the stability of the habit, not just the peak of the habit.
So let's pull all of this together. We started by drawing a hard line between evaluation gathering data to make immediate practical decisions and research building long-term theories.
And we looked at Edward's disaster and realized we can never, ever skip the uncomfortable work of a needs assessment to find the actual gap in our lives.
Yes, we saw Oscar use action research to solve localized problems without needing a perfect laboratory, and we learned how to isolate our own habits using ABB reversal designs.
The ultimate takeaway from these professional frameworks is that you have the power to be the primary evaluator of your own existence.
Which is huge.
It is. Whether it's a budget, a diet, or a workflow, you don't have to rely on vague feelings or the promises of a random influencer. You can translate your messy, subjective experiences into actionable evidence. You can figure out what actually works for you.
You can finally get out of the murky water. But because we always like to push the boundaries a bit on this show, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
If we take these frameworks to the extreme, if we start applying single subject designs to every single aspect of our lives,
Yeah.
if we spend all of our energy relentlessly evaluating, tracking, and optimizing the variables of our day-to-day existence with intense statistical scrutiny, do we run the risk of completely losing the unmeasurable magic of just experiencing our lives as they happen?
Wow, it's a profound question. Are we so busy analyzing the intervention that we forget to actually live in the baseline?
Exactly. Something to chew on the next time you're tempted to rigorously track a brand new life hack. Until next time.